Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Charlotte Stallworth. I'm Vice President of Business Development and Innovation here at Stanford Medicine Children's Health. Thanks so much for joining us for Innovation 202. I am so excited to have you here to discuss innovation and technology. We have some amazing guests to discuss artificial intelligence with Dr. Nima Agiapour and wearables with Dr. Animesh Tandon. Our objectives today, we will a continuation of our last year's course, which was Innovation 101. So we will discuss technology transfer, so the process of moving a technology from the conception and to a product that will impact people in the population. But we'll also have those really exciting conversations. And we'll conclude with the discussion of innovative business models and data strategies. Because as innovators and people involved in healthcare innovation, there are a lot of interesting developments happening in healthcare and in our industry, and we need to be open to looking at and incorporating other data models and other ways, or business models and other ways of doing business. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. First, a little housekeeping on how to get your CME. So this slide, really the first paragraph is the most important. So in about 3 days, you will receive an email that includes the course evaluation and information on claiming your CME credit. If you do not receive that email, feel free to send an email to the Stanford CME office, or you can contact me. My contact data will be on screen at the end of our session. And we will have Q&A at the end as well. Please do hang around and let's discuss what's on your mind regarding healthcare innovation. Innovation is more than just a word. There are so many definitions out there for innovation, describing it as a process or the outcome of a process. I really like the National Science Foundation definition shown here. Basically, using imagination to create something of value to society and making that available to society. And when you think about innovation, and this is true in healthcare and in any other industry, you can categorize and look at innovations in two different ways. There's revolutionary or disruptive innovations that really change the way healthcare or whatever industry you're looking at is done. There's like an inflection point, and that's the revolutionary innovation. So examples of that are the discovery of penicillin, the completion of the Human Genome Project. And then for evolutionary or incremental innovations are equally as important, maybe not that super impactful, but for the population in healthcare affected by that incremental change, the difference can be very important and impactful for them. So extending the shelf life of drugs is one example. Another is using kiosks to check in patients versus using the standard front desk personnel. So those are examples of the incremental evolutionary type of innovation. Next slide, please. So why does innovation matter? Here in our healthcare industry, we're facing a lot of challenges with burnout and shortage of providers, financial challenges, and really a lot of things that we as leaders and providers in healthcare are facing. So really, we want innovation to help us move forward. So you really try to look at those challenges and see them as opportunities to apply an innovation for more efficient and more impactful healthcare. To set our minds in a way of thinking about this and how it applies to providers, let's consider Dr. M, who is a neurologist at an academic medical center, and she's invented an AI enabled wearable that helps the user to maintain their balance, and it's for patients who may be compromised and may be prone to falls. So say for this inventor, what should she do next? Once she's conceived this idea, should she do A, call a medical device company to see if they're interested in it, B, publish the design online and try to crowdsource, C, ask her BFF, an engineer, to design and print a prototype for her, Or D, contact your organization's tech transfer office. All of these are good next steps. I'd love to have you guys pick and answer what you think is the right one. Thanks so much. Yes, definitely D for this purpose, as we're talking about a physician inside an organization. And even if you were, say you worked for a tech company or another type of company, even for the US government, typically your next step is to talk to your tech transfer office to see the ownership status of that innovation. Typically, those of us who are employed by an organization, our IP and things that we come up with belong to that organization, but there are definitely ways that you can participate there. So thanks so much, Brandon, for showing those poll results for us. Let's continue forward in our discussion. Okay, so let's discuss technology transfer. And this is a retro kind of phrase, but it really just means moving an invention from the mind to the market. So this is a process that each of us, no matter what organization we're in or the type of innovation we're doing, is something that we consider. And I will say, even if we're taking different approaches to the development. So these 6 phases can be done out of order and sometimes more than once in order to move an idea to market. And of course, I have to say, most ideas and most innovations do not make it through the entire process to go to market. Really, only those with really high potential or truly unique and compelling typically would make it through to the market. So you do want to disclose, have an evaluation. It could be that once the invention is evaluated, you're advised to do some more product development, thinking about unique features and things like that. So there are a lot of different movement in this process. We're going to highlight a few of these steps a little bit just to lay that foundation before we move forward to the technology discussion. So invention disclosures, most organizations, healthcare systems, corporations have a process to allow innovative employees to submit their ideas for innovation. And typically that is online. It will be reviewed by a professional in IP. They will meet with you to have you describe your invention, talk about others who may be inventors, and your interest in moving it forward. And it's always very important as an inventor for other parties to understand your interest in moving things forward. I've worked with some very creative people who are not interested in moving a technology forward through the process. They want to hand it off to someone else. And typically in healthcare tech transfer offices, if the invention is developed enough, the office will make it available online for entrepreneurs to come in and maybe build a company around or license it. So types of IP is pretty interesting, and I have some more information on patents a little bit later. But it is important for specific inventions, especially drug therapies, devices, AI as well, and other innovations, that you protect it with a patent, and there are various types of patents to file, also for authorship, copyrights, sometimes also for code, and then trademark, trade secrets, and then some other ways that you protect IP that some of us may not think about are with non-disclosure agreements and also material transfer agreements. You don't have to have a legal, a patent and spend money to protect IP. You can do that basically through an NDA. It just really depends on what the technology is, the stage it's in, and how you're sharing it and for what reasons. So let's take another look at the case study. So say Dr. M has followed our advice and spoken to our tech transfer office and kind of discussed those various steps that we've been talking about. And she's advanced her idea and probably published, and the clinical trials underway. The tech transfer office recommends that she market the invention, or that they market it. This would be a collaborative effort in marketing. So what does that really mean? So let's take a look at what marketing is. And it's really interesting that marketing an invention can happen throughout the development of that product. So say you're developing a device that would, say, suspend the bladder, and you're working on the technique. You have maybe someone inside your organization or a third-party company developing it with you. You may still reach out to Boston Scientific and other companies to see if they're interested in this space and this type of technology, even before it's finished and you finished your proof of concept. You may just want to gauge that interest. And sometimes you can get companies to partner with you on that development. So marketing has its role in various stages of the development of the IP, but of course the goal is to have an entity come in typically and help you move that item to the public. But of course, sometimes you're going to form a startup yourself, and you may not be seeking this type of assistance. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, it looks like we're having, okay, great. So let's talk about a little bit about the sorry about that. Can we back up a little bit, please? To slide 12. Yes, funding the innovation. Funding is really important, and typically funding is something you need to think about almost as soon as you decide to move forward with an innovation. The prototype development, the iterations, and hiring people maybe to help with code and other things are costly. You're going to be thinking about funding. There are grants that the government offers with the STTR and SBIR, which are very helpful. If your technology has gone through some proof of concept in some stages, you can catch the attention of venture capitalists who can help fund to a certain stage or certain milestones as well. And then, of course, for pediatric healthcare, pediatrics is an underserved market. It is a small market. So typically, venture capitalists, angel investors are looking to invest in technologies that have a larger market and a larger potential return. Fortunately, the FDA understands that and has created the Pediatric Device Consortiums. I believe there's still 5 of those in the country, and those were just announced, re-announced and reissued this year, and really help to support those innovators who are focused on the underserved pediatric market in creating medical devices and providing funding, but also just as important, mentorship, guidance through various regulatory paths and things like that. So super excited to know that's available. And I think as we start talking about kind of the innovative business models and things like that, it's important that we realize that we'll have to collaborate and work together to innovate moving forward for underserved markets and traditional markets. So let's see the next step after funding, or as you're receiving your funding throughout. The final goal there is to make a deal. And typically when you have your innovation and maybe you filed a patent on it, typically you would want that protection. You're looking for a licensee, and a license really is allowing another party to take the technology and move it forward through commercialization. The ownership of the technology or the IP still belongs to the organization, and the inventor maintains their rights as the inventor. And typically coming out of academic healthcare, the inventor would remain involved in the license. And that's typically what our inventors like to do. Another way to make a deal is to assign the technology to another party. And in this case, the ownership rights do convey to that party. This, I would say, in academic healthcare happens sometimes. I've been involved in a few of these. Typically, this happens when a inventor leaves the organization to go to another organization, and there's not a co-inventor or champion who can take on that invention at the parent organization. I've been involved in a situation where the inventor left and wanted the organization to advance the technology but without the champion, we could not. So we did end up assigning those rights. I think that's pretty rare, but it does happen. Strategic alliances, we talked about a little bit, working with device or pharmaceutical startup, other types of entities to bring a technology to a certain stage, maybe to help with proof of concept and other milestones to determine whether or not that alliance will then turn into a license or another commercial arrangement. And then those technologies that have really high potential that are typically super compelling may be considered for startups. So you may incubate the idea internally in your organization for a while. And really, I think typically with academic healthcare organizations and others, there are accelerators or people in the tech transfer office who can help support that development before the startup company is launched. And then once it's launched, if there's still a relationship desired between the home organization and the startup company, that would be done via a contractual arrangement. And then for added consulting here, because there are definitely companies who seek experts who are physicians, nurses, IS experts to do consulting for them with the goal of developing or enhancing a product. And typically in those situations, the provider or IT specialist is asked to assign their rights to that company before they get started. But if you're asked to consult, and in this manner, you would want to understand that. And typically, depending on where you're employed, you may be required to bring that consulting arrangement back to your organization, or you may have the freedom to engage your own attorney and determine how to move forward. So it's just something to think about when you enter into that arrangement. Typically, there is consideration back to you. So maybe that's a good trade-off, but it's good to understand the company's perspective and your position before engaging. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's take a look at your role as the inventor. So you're very important to the process. And I mentioned this a little earlier. We really want you to be involved, of course, in disclosing. That's obvious. Nothing would happen without the inventor disclosing their invention. But we ask that the inventor be involved through all processes, through the evaluation, through the iterative development of the IP, filing for a patent protection to ensure all of the nuances and uses of the technology are mentioned there to make the patent as broad as possible. And then as you're even developing the deal, the license, we want the inventor to be involved, whether or not the inventor will maintain a role in technology once it's licensed out. We want them involved in as we structure and decide who we're working with. So it's important that you maintain your optimism, but then also be open to the facts of the situation as it develops. I applaud and support all of you who are on that journey with your technologies and your ideas, moving it through the phases for tech transfer. I think in healthcare, it's so especially rewarding to know that you have the opportunity to impact the life of and many lives of people all over the world. So just stay motivated and stick with it. Next slide, please. Speaking of innovative people, I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Animesh Tandon from Cleveland Clinic to join me in a conversation about innovation and wearables, which is a key part of innovation in healthcare. I think a lot of us have seen some really neat devices and wearables coming out. Dr. Tandon, thanks so much for being here. I'm so happy to see you. Please tell us about yourself, your work at Cleveland Clinic, your role there, and we'll start talking about wearables.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte, for having me. I'm Animesh Tandon. I go by Ashu. I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I've been at Cleveland Clinic for about 2 years. And my interest, I do cardiac MRI as my day job, and then I have research related to cardiac MRI and imaging, and then research related to wearables and how we should use them in the congenital heart disease population. And I actually came to that. I am by no means a natural innovator. I came to all this stuff from the research side, which was I was a fellow. We had a clinical problem to solve, which was we have high risk patients who are in the outpatient setting, and I have no way to track them. How well are they doing? And so the reason I thought about wearable sensors was because there was a clinical problem that needed to be solved.
I think probably that's the best way to think about innovation, right? It's from a problem that needs to be solved. So that's wonderful. Of course, you and I have worked together in various organizations. And so I'm just going to ask you a few questions, but please feel free to mention whatever you are thinking about with wearables. So the COVID pandemic kind of highlighted the inequities in healthcare, and many healthcare institutions were pursuing innovations, and then really, I think post-COVID, we're really thinking about disparities. And one of the things I think about is how innovation can help decrease disparities. And I think wearables is a good opportunity for that. Could you talk a little bit about how wearables could be used to maybe address healthcare inequities in pediatric healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. Access to care is challenging. When I was at UT Southwestern in Dallas, we would have patients who we were the nearest center from El Paso or Amarillo or cities hours away. And I think that bringing care to people where they are is probably in the long term going to be far more effective than making them come to us. And I think that's where wearables are really going to change the paradigm about how we manage patients. So I mentioned this group of infants with significant congenital heart disease who are at high risk of morbidity, mortality, readmission, unplanned reinterventions. And that was the problem that I was trying to solve, which was to figure out how can we monitor these babies in the outpatient setting and know how well they're doing. And there's a lot of parts to that, right? There are hardware design. So you mentioned in your introduction that there aren't always many companies making things specifically for kids. That was one of the challenges, is to find hardware that might actually work for that. And then even, is the hardware accurate, right? Is it tested in the right population? You had mentioned COVID specifically, right? COVID highlighted a problem that we already knew, which was pulse oximetry doesn't work as well in patients with darker skin. And there's physics behind it, but that testing wasn't required for FDA clearance or for marketing or anything like that. While we want to make sure that wearables reduce inequities, we want to make sure that the wearables aren't also increasing inequities by giving us spurious or false data in settings where we're using them. So we need to make sure that they're tested in the right populations, tested across a broad range of people. And then what do those data mean? I think that's also a bit of a challenge, right? We know that ambulatory blood pressure monitoring in adults is more indicative of long-term outcomes than the blood pressure we take in clinic. We know that using wearables for AFib detection has a higher yield, using Zio patches or any of the other long-term monitoring solutions, right? But what threshold should we use in kids? Completely unknown, right? Because we've never had access to those data. And so I think by being able to bring the physiologic monitoring with wearables to the patient wherever they are, we will have access to this enormous but entirely new pool of data. And now the question is going to be like, how do we interpret it, and what clinical decision can we make based on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. You've made some really good points on one with the inequities in healthcare overall. And it really is important with the clinical trials, when you're developing the innovations, that you're using a broad scope of people being involved in the clinical trial. So you get data, hopefully, that allows you to create a device or an intervention that is impactful for all of the users and not just a subset of those. So really, you're right, you have to move upstream with your eye toward diversity and inclusion in the creation of the innovation, and then the data that you're getting from using that innovation, you're right, what is this telling you and what should you do next? And so I really like the kind of innovative cycle that an innovation you'll have trials or you'll use it, you'll have that data, and that may lead to even additional innovation, right? It's like a exciting cycle to be in. Talk a little bit about AI. The prevalence and allure of AI is impacting all industries, even healthcare, and so many processes and procedures are in need of innovation. And I like to think about one of my jobs is partnerships, and I always think about asymmetric partnering one type of entity with a totally different type of entity. And so when you think about AI and wearables, what are some ways they could combine to positively impact the health of children?
Yeah, I think the most obvious way is, right, when we get this pool of data, how to make it interpretable. One approach could be to say, okay, for patient X, their heart rate has been a mean of blank with standard deviation of blank for the last week. And today it's +3 standard deviation. So you're like, this is a problem. But that's unlikely to take any real patient-specific kind of patterns into account, right? So with these new time series analytics methods, I bet that's going to allow us to gather more insights from these data than the standard statistical approaches might. I think the second way is probably implementation, right? So once you have, let's say you know what the pattern is that you're looking for, but you've actually developed this at scale. There's no way that a physician or a nurse or somebody sitting there watching the data streaming by and saying, "Oh, look at that! Like I just caught this pattern," right? We will need AI algorithms to screen those data and bring up the salient ones, like the EDCT triage algorithms and stuff, right? Like, how do you sort through this massive pile of data to bring the most salient pieces to you? So I think there's some role in that in implementation. And then I think probably in signal acquisition as well, right? In the imaging side, there's a lot of work being done in using super resolution algorithms to allow you to take a shorter MRI scan and then reconstruct it into a better sequence, or to use one kind of sequence to predict what the other kind of sequence is going to look like. So then you save time for the patient and the scanner. Likewise, noise reduction in wearable data, maybe even chip design, right? Like we've seen companies talk about actually designing the chips that go into the sensors using AI. I think there's going to be a multitude of ways that this technology affects how wearables get made. And I think you were talking about partnerships. I think Cleveland Clinic, since we're not a university per se, we have to look for those partnerships to drive it. I think the 10-year partnership of Cleveland Clinic and IBM has been in the news to drive quantum computing and all of that kind of stuff. But I think a big portion of that is AI, right? Like, how do we bring the expertise that exists in outside fields to healthcare more effectively? And I think that was the main goal of this partnership, not to just, we have a quantum computer in the cafeteria of one of the research buildings. Like, that's great. But right, practically, what's that going to do? Maybe it'll do something in a decade. I don't know. I'm probably not smart enough to know what that means. But I think, right, analyzing the data we do have requires some expertise. And so I think that's an example of a partnership where both sides get something that they need.
Yeah, I love that example. Definitely those asymmetric partnerships, I think, generate a lot of synergies. 1 + 1 = 10,000 maybe, right? With IBM. And of course, it's very cool that you have that quantum computer there. I don't know if you've seen it. I would love to see it. I think the potential there in several years, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I have a picture like posing in front of it. It's just like a box. It doesn't look that exciting from the outside. So,
really? Don't those require like very...
Yeah, I can show it to you sometime. It's
okay, all right. So I'll take you up on that. So let's talk about government, right? So it's great when you have tech companies, other companies partnering with healthcare. What role do you think government and maybe other industries could play?
Yeah, it has to. It's massive, right? I feel like, I don't want to get too political, but the role of government is to increase the floor for everybody. And you pointed out, many industry partners don't think of pediatrics as their first market, right? Unless they're specifically designed for an infant or a pediatric use case. everybody wants that 100x return on their venture capital, and
Right.
pediatrics is rarely going to be the place where they get that. And so I think that there are a huge role for government to support that kind of innovation and make sure that innovation reaches everybody, all the small niche populations, all of the populations where the regular incentives don't always line up.
Yeah.
And I think that you mentioned the FDA Pediatric Device Consortia. I'm happy to say that one of the new ones of those, the Midwest Pediatric Device Consortium, is Nationwide, Cincinnati Children's, and us. And that we were very happy to be part of that consortium. But I think it's a huge role to say, like, how do we make sure that the fruits of all the labor gets to all of the people? Children are therapeutic orphans in the pharmaceutical industry for sure, and it's becoming increasingly clear that they're AI orphans or wearable orphans or technology orphans as well, right? Like that just hasn't been a focus. So things like the PDC, there are only pharmaceuticals for kids because there's a patent extension, but there is no such for medication, but there is no such incentive for medical devices. So how can government incentivize companies to make things just for kids? I think we need to be creative about those models.
I agree with that. And yeah, I think the PDCs are a great step in that direction and probably could be a model for other focus on underserved populations for innovative healthcare development. And of course, Stanford and UCSF remain a part of those groups across the country. And I think there's effort for some interactions between and among the participants in the Pediatric Device Consortium. More to come there, definitely.
I would say one other thing real fast is about the data, right? I would say the other thing that government can, or funders can do, is, especially government funders, is to mandate that any data that are collected belong A, to the patient instead of the company, and B, that they are released or made available publicly. Because and I know that's a bit controversial, but that's what happened. Only when the NIH said that NIH-funded studies need to be published open source did suddenly open source become a thing, right? Because you had to follow the money. And now everybody's fighting for data, and places like Stanford and Cleveland Clinic and other big hospital systems or big companies with a trove of data have a trove of data that they can use and are generally unwilling to share. Not to criticize Cleveland Clinic in particular, I think most health systems aren't willing to just give out their data. And so I think if those data come from research projects funded by the government, then I think the government could potentially mandate and say, hey, your data need to be open. And there is a movement in that. American Heart Association has a new data sharing policy where the data need to be publicly available. So it's not earth-shatteringly new, it's just taking a long time. So
I think it is earth-shattering. And I'll talk about data a little bit later in this presentation, but data also is very valuable, right? So on the one hand, there's the position you're saying and make it open source, but on the other hand, there's a monetization happening with other entities, right? And so I really think it's important that healthcare also look at things with a business lens, even in not-for-profit healthcare, to understand the value of the data and are there other mechanisms and ways to use data to positively impact patients and be smart and efficient in that use and not just ignore maybe some opportunities because that's what tech companies do. That's not what healthcare does. We probably should have had a debate on that. I didn't realize we were kind of on opposite sides there, but yeah, I love thinking about it and appreciate your position there. One final question. What are some of your aspirational goals for wearables in healthcare or pediatric healthcare?
Yeah, I think that this is going to right hospital at home, like the clinical management hospital at home isn't super new, but especially in pediatrics, it's not a big proportion of what we do. And I think partially it's because we haven't really had the way to monitor patients effectively. And I'm always jealous of the endocrinologists because continuous glucose monitoring is like the prototype wearable sensing, right? It's the prototype of getting important physiologic data, being able to act on it, and knowing in the short term that you've had a positive effect. And because they have a really great intermediate surrogate outcome of A1C. I know that there's problems with A1C, but like compared to what we have in cardiology, A1C is like great, right? You give somebody a CGM with a pump, you show that their A1C dropped 2 points, and you know that it's going to help them. And I think what we need to do is be creative about what are the surrogate endpoints that we can use to show the medical benefit of these wearable technologies in different populations. How do we take that model of CGM and bring it to other kinds of diseases? So whether wearables are the therapy, whether they're the monitor, or whether they're the outcome measure, right? They generate the outcome measure. Any of those are where wearables could show their value. We just need to prove it now. We got a bunch of cool tech. Now we have to show that it's meaningful.
Definitely. And that's a great point, and we will end there. It's been a great pleasure of mine and everyone who will hear this to have you discuss wearables with us and your perspectives. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks. This is a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So we move from our discussion of wearables to the tech of the, I don't know, millennium, AI. Maybe quantum computing will compete with that. But for right now, the AI disruption across the healthcare industry, but also other industries, is very compelling. And I think nobody's really trying to turn away from that. I think we're all in all aspects of healthcare to determine how we can leverage AI to improve our processes, to collaborate better, but with the primary goal of improving the health of the population. So let's take a look at some data. I took a look at the US Patent Office and their data on AI patents, which I think is pretty compelling. You can see here the number of AI patent applications since 1976 has increased exponentially, and I'm sure still going up. And then on the next slide, they provide a detailed look at the type of AI. So the focus of the AI, from evolutionary computation, natural language processing, machine learning, vision and AI hardware, and then the planning, control, and knowledge processing. So you can see what people are focusing on. Of course, you cannot really tell which industry they're focusing on, but I would say each of these areas would be impactful to healthcare. Just a few definitions here after looking at those charts. I'm sure all of you have been reading about AI and probably have explored some large language models. Some definitions here: narrow AI is the AI when you're really focused on one thing, like facial recognition. That human level AI really is focused on interaction with humans, like the chatbots. And the human-centered artificial intelligence AI is really focused on improving the capabilities of humans. It was really interesting. I was listening to an NPR broadcast a couple of weeks ago, and basically the people they were talking to were saying they're really trying to create AI that's better than humans, but not really focused on humans. So it's really an interesting thought of how AI should be developed. And of course, there's been lots of talk in the news about putting some controls around the development of AI out of fear that it could lead to an extinction event for humans, which is pretty scary to think about. And then also there's generative AI, which can create new information, new movies, photos, text, which is threatening in some ways, maybe for those in the movie industry. There have been a lot of complaints about that, but also very exciting. And I think we all know that innovation moves forward, time moves forward, the humans and all of our devices and things that we use will progress. I think I'm excited to see where we're going and where we end up with AI in healthcare. And I'm excited to speak now with Dr. Nima Abiapour. He is a scientist and a physician here at Stanford Medicine. We'll talk with him about his AI work. It's really exciting. So thanks for joining for this part of the presentation. Good afternoon, Dr. Agiyopour. Thanks so much for joining this discussion of innovation and technology in healthcare. I am so excited to have you join us today. So please tell us about yourself and your work in AI.
Thanks for having me here. I am Nima Agiyopour, an associate professor and vice chair of research in data science at Stanford's anesthesiology department, also appointed in pediatrics and biomedical data sciences. I'm a machine learning scientist by training. I used to make robots that play soccer games before I switched over to medicine. We are now a lab of about 35 people, all machine learning scientists. We have the privilege of going around the hospital and finding interesting problems to work on. We work on anything from biology and multiomics data integration to wearable devices and electronic health records.
Amazing. Thank you. That's so compelling. Everything you said. I have so many questions. Maybe start with a pretty straightforward one. AI has the ability to transform healthcare in several ways, including providing improved access to quality healthcare. Can you tell us what uses you're most excited about and which you think will be most impactful?
Yeah, there are many low-hanging fruits. The line between the science and the tradition of medicine is blurred. In many areas, we do things because we have always been doing them that way, or because that's what we learned during our training, and things are not necessarily scientifically driven. In many cases, they are, but in many cases, they also are not. In that sense, AI is giving us a fresh start. It's giving us the ability to go consume large amounts of information and based on that, reevaluate how we practice medicine. This can include anything from prediction and diagnosis of various diseases to guiding therapies, to looking at healthcare equity, racial disparities, and so on. With that last one, if we are not careful, AI also has the opportunity to reflect the biases that the society has. But if you're doing things carefully, that has the ability to give us a fresh start. For now, most of the use cases of AI have been in prediction of diseases and in diagnosis. But I'm particularly excited about the opportunities that are out there for using AI to guide treatments to make things actionable. Right now, I think we are at risk of a little bit of an overload of predictions and alarms, contributing to alarm fatigue for physicians, having too many things beeping at them. So we have to be pretty thoughtful about what solutions we deploy and when.
I really appreciate that. I think as entrepreneurs are creating new technologies, a lot of them really think they're making an impact for the physicians and really trying to create something that will give them more awareness and more information. And I really appreciate what you're saying, that we have to look at the way medicine is practiced and maybe not just find an algorithm that does that more quickly or more efficiently, but really think about the new ways that you can use technology to maybe disrupt and change and really make big improvements in the way medicine is practiced. So I really appreciate that. With the advent of ChatGPT, you're right, we're seeing a lot more uses of AI and interest in AI. So what are some of the ethical concerns that could arise with really doubling down on the use of AI?
Deep learning algorithms are just neural networks that learn whatever data that's presented to them. If our system and society already has biases, they're going to just learn those very same biases as what is normal. If our healthcare system already spends more resources on people from a particular race, the AI is going to learn to recommend to do just that. This has been explored in other areas outside of medicine for a very long time. In a famous study, people looked at AI algorithms that were being used for recruiting new talent. and they ask the algorithm, what are the most important features that you're looking at to make your recommendations? Turns out the most important features are gender, race, age. Because learning from humans that this is the way to select good candidates, because that's how the humans were selecting the best candidates. It can very much learn those biases, but the good news is that it can also be used, as they did in this example, to reveal biases and to actively try to mitigate those problems. This is a very active area of research in machine learning and AI right now, to use it to both reveal biases in the society and also to make less biased decisions.
I definitely appreciate that. I've been having conversations with some of our colleagues at Stanford about how you have incentives for the innovators to build in and check for biases as they're creating their technologies versus after launching, is because really people want to move as quickly as possible and commercialize. And that's typically the incentive and the path. And really, it'd be great to build in some incentives up front to create like ethical AI, if you can say, geared toward doing the right thing. We'll see if that ever comes to fruition. But I think even if people are motivated by the desire to do the right thing, maybe that's enough. But I think financial incentive or other incentive would also be great. Would you like to share any information about your work or other specifics that I have not asked about?
Oh, did we run out of questions?
No, it's just switching it up a little. Okay, let me ask. Okay,
No, I have stuff that I will show you, but it's all planned for one of your last questions.
Okay, let's see. So what advice would you give entrepreneurs who are creating AI solutions for physicians or for the healthcare industry in general?
I think the generative modeling market, as well as the generative modeling of text market, are pretty saturated at this point. There are too many people trying to predict this disease or automate the writing of that clinical note. And there is an entire world out there of other problems that have not been solved. So my first advice would be to try not to follow the crowd and think about new problems. And with predictive modeling in particular, it's important very much to speak with physicians, to engage with hospital leaders, to talk to nurses, to make sure that you are solving a problem that needs a solution. It may be a problem that they don't know they have yet, but regardless, you do need to have many of those conversations. And Stanford does a great job teaching design thinking and need finding through BioDesign, through Ignite, through many other resources. I'll share one example. Here we built a linkage between Stanford's Children's Hospital and Adult Hospital to predict diseases in newborns. For example, this particular baby got sepsis when they were 1 month old. They got bronchopulmonary dysplasia when they were 2 months old. They didn't get any of these other diseases. We predicted everything right. We predicted which ones they are not going to get correctly. But importantly, we predicted all of these a couple months before the baby was even born, which is borderline science fiction as far as today's pediatrics is concerned. But when we started thinking about what is the right commercial approach to deploy this, how do you think about this as an entrepreneur? I am pretty doubtful that just putting this AI algorithm in the hands of physicians is going to create much value. They're already very busy. They already burn out and so on. They don't need yet another AI algorithm predicting various diseases for that. There was a paper in JAMA Cardiology, I believe, a few weeks ago, where they showed that an algorithm that can almost perfectly predict mortality can be deployed for their patients. And when they did that in a randomized controlled trial, they learned that not only it didn't improve patient outcomes, but it didn't even change the practice of the physicians. Mm-hmm. They continued to do whatever that they were practicing. It didn't change anything to tell them that, oh, this patient is at more risk, that patient is predicted to be at less risk. That is not really the way to think about in my view, how we can use AI in the real world. So in this case, the way that we are deploying this is that we use it to come up with interventions. For example, when a baby is born prematurely, they don't have the gastrointestinal system to process breast milk. You have to put them on these IV bags to get their nutrition. What goes into the IV bags is subjective and pretty resource intensive. You need a dietitian, a neonatologist, a pharmacist to all collaborate with each other to make the IV bag in a sterile environment and ship it over time. We figured out how to have the AI algorithm design the IV bags instead. And in doing so, it can reduce cost by 80% and it can increase safety. So this is still built on the same algorithm that was able to make these predictions. And the algorithm is looking at tens of thousands of variables, including whether the mother was using insulin or antihypertensives, but it's even looking at history of chemotherapy many years ago, many other factors, even social determinants of health like incarceration and homelessness and tobacco use. Putting all of these together to make these predictions, but we don't try to push the predictions on anybody. We push the actionability with these IV bags. We say instead of trying to figure out how to come up with the composition of that IV bag, here is the AI. I've already done that. It already knows what's going to happen to these babies several months down the road. All you need to do is to go ahead and use it. We are at the same time making better predictions, but also reducing the workload of the physicians rather than adding to it.
That's amazing. So really going one step further in the work to really be helpful to the physician as they're seeing these conditions or understanding that these conditions are predicted and being actionable. I think that's really an important statements that you're making, that it's not just enough to predict, because really it's helpful to know what to do and maybe what to do early to prevent more, impactful consequences in the future. I really appreciate that. So I think artificial intelligence will continue to be the sparkly, glittery technology that we're all going for. I know there are a lot of considerations in its development, the ethical considerations we've talked about, and even with some models, the lack of explainability, right? That the model may provide data that can be verified, but you can't really explain how the model came up with those data and how the algorithm came up with those conclusions. It's interesting to think about and contemplate. It really feels like the future is now. It's just hard to think of where we're headed with this, to something really amazing or it's something not so much. Wow. So would you like to make any closing comments, Dr. Aguilar?
Thank you for organizing this. I think these are important topics, and thank you for thinking about all these topics to talk about.
Well, thanks so much for being with me today and with all of us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Continue our discussion with moving back to the tech transfer discussion just a little bit, because as with developing an innovation, and whether you're using design thinking, agile approach to software development and human-centered design, any of those approaches, those iterative approaches focused on a solution and focus on the customer. The goal there in all of those approaches is to get an innovative solution to the public. And an important part of that is the business model that you're using around your innovation. So I'd like to move to discussing that a bit and how business models are important in this way. Let's move forward to the next slide, please. Okay, maybe we're still having a technical problem. I can just discuss what comes next. So let's discuss what is a business model before we talk a little bit about the different types of business models. I think about this as how does a company create value and how does it make money? So you start with the innovation. And many of us will start with the innovation. We're going to build, say, our startup company around the innovation. So we have a structure, and we won't talk about what type of company it is. Typically, an LLC is a limited liability company, is what you use to house your innovation and that kind of operations. And then you're going to decide what is it that you're sending out to the public or to the consumer, and who is your consumer. So that is the decision. What is it you're sending out, and who is it going to? And then what is coming back into the company? What sort of consideration? Typically money, but maybe there's some other value that's coming back to the company. So understanding those mechanisms is very important as you launch your startup, but also as you consider partnering as a healthcare system or as a startup. Understanding that flow for the other parties is very important in determining your position and how you move forward with them. So I ask that you take the time to graph this for yourself, and lots of companies have creative or multiple business models that you really need to make sure you understand. Next slide. Okay, so let's set the tone with some traditional business models. You guys have heard of these before, and as you see them in your mind, you can understand what I was talking about with that diagram. You have a wholesale model, retail, the franchise setup, but then also what you don't typically think about in traditional business models is the US healthcare system, but it's been around for a very long time. So let's just take a look at how that is set up. So it is pretty unique because if we kind of draw the lines, we could probably graph that. Can we see the next slide, please? As the patient or the client is not the person who pays, the employer really is providing the options for the employee on what insurance they have. And then, of course, the provider really is in some ways impacted by the government, the insurance company, the employer, and of course the patient as well. So it's very non-linear, and I probably should have mapped that out. That probably would have made a very nice diagram. Let's move on to, as we think about the US healthcare system, I will just say for you innovators out there, and especially those who are in business and thinking about business, do think about the innovation of the US healthcare system. I think many people say it's broken and they want to work around the edges of it, but I do believe that it is poised for innovation. And if you've been in business development for a while, you'll know that sometimes it's the long play that you have to make to keep working on something for over a period of years until something shifts, maybe in the Senate, in the market leadership of some insurance companies, something will shift that allows some disruptive change to occur. Business models, some to look at. I just put up a few examples here of the exchange broker model that we may see in the marketplace in tech with Uber. You see kind of exchange broker in that they're in the middle, providing a person who has a car, who has the ability and time to drive people around, and a person who needs a ride, and matches those people together. Much the same as a real estate agent matches people who are trying to sell a house and buy a house, right? That's typically what you think of when you think of an exchange or a broker or the market exchange. So we think about how could a healthcare system have that kind of models. You're probably thinking of some examples. I'd love to hear what you're thinking when we have the Q&A at the end, or you can put your questions in the Q&A session here on the Zoom. I was thinking like clinical trials are an example of that, and many of us healthcare systems do work with pharmaceutical and device companies, and we conduct clinical trials, and so that those patients and people who may be candidates for the trial have the opportunity to be involved. In that way, the hospital is a broker. Love to think of other examples of how this model could apply in healthcare in hospitals. Next slide, please. The freemium model, I think this is one of my favorites, but maybe because I just like saying freemium because it's such a nice word. But this is a model where you offer some level of support or service for free or close to free, and then to get the premium services or access, you have to pay an amount. So LinkedIn is a good example of that, Spotify as well. For healthcare, kind of thinking some of the insurance plans are that way in that you pay a very low rate, not exactly free, but for your healthcare maintenance. But when you have something that requires a surgery or something else, you pay a lot more. So your incentive maybe in that area, different from the market premium, is to stay in the premium space by maintaining healthcare and having those checkups. But I'm not sure that's a great example. So I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking there. And then another example of innovative business model is the one-stop shop. All of you are familiar with Amazon and of course YouTube, where if you want to know how to do anything, cut your bangs, tie a tie, you can find it on YouTube. For healthcare, I was really thinking for our hospitals, it's the multidisciplinary clinic where you may have a patient who's complicated and they may need to be seen, say, by a pulmonologist, the mental health professionals, and maybe cardiology. If you have all of those specialists on site in the clinic, when the person comes in for their visit, it creates efficiencies, a better experience for the patient, also allows for collaborative interactions among those providers. So I'm sure there are a lot of other examples there as well for healthcare with one-stop shops. Next slide. Really, with these examples and others, and I'm sure if you're in innovation, you've been thinking about how consumerism can drive healthcare innovation, because patients are just regular people, right? They're only patients because they're at your facility, but when they leave your facility, they're going to the bank and shopping, they're just consumers. So we think of the patient as a consumer, we have to realize that they really are going to keep demanding the efficiencies and transparencies and ease that they experience in banking, online shopping, other aspects of their lives. They want that in healthcare. So entities that we could provide that and think of consumerism, and it's not a bad thing to think of the patient as a consumer for the point of the innovation and the efficiency. I think that consumerism married with or coming at the same time that rural hospitals are having financial issues, they're losing essential programs like labor and delivery, a lot of them are closing. And then the thought and the focus that we have post-COVID on equitable, innovative programs are needed and require investment. So the culmination of those things coming together, to me, provide a tipping point to looking again at the data that healthcare systems have and the asset of that data and how it should be used. And of course, as Ashu Tandon just mentioned, there are a lot of inertia, legitimate concerns, ethical concerns, privacy of how data can be used. But I think there are some elements. One is AI, and that I think at some point AI will advance to the point of accurately and confidently de-identifying vast data sets. Generation Z and younger might be at the point where they would consent to commercial use of their data. And data policies will, at hospitals, I think they will be incrementally changed and updated with guardrails, but to allow for some monetization, alternative use of data with the ultimate goal of benefiting patient care and being cognizant of changes in the marketplace and these things that kind of move us to a tipping point to doing something very different from what we've done before. So it's just food for thought. I think this is a really compelling area for healthcare to consider, and I know lots of people are considering it, and many hospitals are inundated with requests for data. I get that a lot from startups to established companies in the marketplace. One of the top requests is for access to data. And one thing I also like to talk about, and I would like you guys to think about as well, is the data monetization, which is the process of using data to procure economic benefit, right? So I don't think monetization is a bad word. I think it's really good to think about data as an asset and how it could be used in an ethical, safe, compliant way to benefit all parties involved. So this is my last slide, data strategies and business models. I think some of you probably are involved in development of AI. And as you're designing your AI, one of the phases of that design is considering your data strategy, right? And some elements that factor into that. And really, we think about it as a company, even in traditional models, without AI, you're going to think about that system lock-in. And if there's some element of your data strategy and your other strategies that allow you to not only bring in customers, but make that interaction and that relationship with you as a company sticky, that system lock-in, so that they don't want to leave. Say for LinkedIn, they use a strategy with data to have their algorithms know more about you, tell you information, tell you who you should connect with, and then you're already connected with a lot of people. So it makes it hard to leave, because if you left, you would lose all of those connections and then all of that advice that they're giving you. So they build their strategy to bring you in and keep you in. It's something to be aware of, but also to think about as you're launching your startup and as others want to partner with you. Think about, is their strategy somehow built to create that stickiness? And it's okay if that is what you want, but it's good to be just cognizant of kind of the long-term play. And not saying that's a bad thing, it's business, right? So in conclusion, I would say innovative technologies, business models, and considering data strategies can revolutionize aspects of the US healthcare system and perhaps the fundamental underlying mechanisms of our healthcare system. I think tech companies and startups may be the catalysts for these changes, but really those of us in healthcare already positioned and looked at by others as this big, old-fashioned, immovable entity, we really have the knowledge of what needs to be changed and the incentive and focus to be able to, I think, disrupt and transform the industry from the inside. This concludes is this a lecture? Presentation portion of the Innovation 202. Thank you all so much for joining and sticking with us. Really appreciate it. I see lots of questions in the Q&A, so maybe we can take down the slides and just talk about, oh, great, you're still here. Ashu, would you like to come back and answer questions with me? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, happy to.
Okay, here's one. How can someone with an engineering background who wants to build healthcare solutions targeting disconnected communities or villages in India, how can someone do this when most of the tech development is currently in the US?
I think your point about funding, right? There are people who want to fund this work, and it's likely through philanthropic grants. But I think that would be probably the most likely way to get that started, in my opinion. But I don't know, Charlotte, if you had other ideas.
Oh, I agree. I think that there are lots of entities out there that want to fund that work, but I would also say I don't think all the innovations happening in the US. There's lots of innovation happening all over the world. And I think with you as an engineer, your mind is in that direction of creating things. You can find like-minded people. I think be willing to try to move forward even on a shoestring budget and apply for grants. You really have to push yourself. As I was saying, the innovator has to remain motivated. So there'll be lots of obstacles, but yeah, there are a lot of ways to move forward, but you really have to push yourself over those initial hurdles to apply for the funding, create on your own, find collaborators and keep yourself motivated and moving forward. Okay, let's see. We have another question. Let's see, a lot of questions about AI. Say AI until now can't give insured info that can be used in healthcare, I think. Yeah, there are a lot of, I guess, pilots going on across the US and probably around the world on using AI in healthcare. And really, I can't recall the name of it, but I did hear of a large language model. ChatGPT has all data, but if you have a model focused on healthcare or a specific area, I believe there is a lot of confidence that those models can be used in healthcare. And of course, everything is not diagnosis. Some areas where AI can be efficient in healthcare is improving business processes, predictive analytics. There's so many other elements of healthcare that AI could be used in, and I'm sure is used in. It's just will become even more dominant and prominent, I think, in the future. Let's see, there's one says, can you see these questions, Ashu?
Yeah. One of the questions from Divya was about data. Like it's hard for startups to get access to data. The universities and healthcare systems negotiate hard to get IP or royalties for access to the data. I 100% agree with you that data is valuable. And I think hospitals should figure out how to extract the maximum value from that data. My point was more about government-funded research data, right? Like if you get an NIH grant or AHA grant, then I personally think that since that's government-funded research, that there should be some mechanism for that data to be publicly accessible. Divya was saying, how can a startup without expensive legal representation approach a university or healthcare system to craft an agreement? Can they just buy the data outright? I would say the most likely way you're going to get access to the data is by partnering with somebody at the hospital. In my experience, like if you find a clinician or an administrator who's passionate about the solution that you're providing, then everything is solvable if you figure out how to have the right advocate from the inside. And I think that, but it's unlikely that you're going to get it for free, right? And I think that's because those data are valuable, right? The organization or the university has created an infrastructure, has paid to build the way to collect the data, has collected those patients, so you're unlikely to get that for free. But it might be of interest to you to work with the university or the healthcare system, because if they really believe in your solution, then they might help invest in your company and push that forward with a partnership, right? So I think like the David v. Goliath startup versus hospital system is one way to look at it, but another way to look at it is say, how do I get the right partner to help me grow? And that might be a more feasible long-term solution to get your hands on the data.
Yeah, I agree. You need an advocate. And I think also the data use policies and at hospitals will evolve over time as well. And I've also wondered if at some point AI would create a huge data set, right? Like a proxy for health hospital data if hospitals did not share. I would think that is possible to create a set, but maybe that is the number one idea if you could get it from someone else.
Yeah, synthetic data are out there, especially in imaging. They take large real data sets and then generate similarly distributed but generated data. I think there's probably, I know that there is some approach towards that in doing it in EHR like note data, but for sure there's synthetic data in imaging. But the problem is, right, even generating that requires some effort. How the person gets paid, how the person or institution or company gets paid for that effort, right? Very little of this is going to get done for free. So it requires an infrastructure to build it. But I think, and Yusuf asked, like, any idea where I can get non-proprietary health medical data to train and fine-tune my AI model? Does Stanford provide such a database or any other source? There are open source data sets that exist. It depends on what kind, but they're usually not, unless they're funded to be like curated and managed. A lot of data sets are in imaging, at least, right? There's a lot of like competition data sets. Kaggle has competitions where they're like, make the best segmentation of this MRI data and stuff like that. So they do exist. There isn't a database of all the freely accessible data that I know of, but people have been trying to do that through BrainX and other communities to build a way to help you find data that exists. And then like things like UK Biobank and all of us, like these are government funded large data sets. And you have to apply and there's a nominal fee, but like Cleveland Clinic has access to UK Biobank. We didn't provide any data to UK Biobank, but as an institution, we have a license to use those data. So there are data sets that exist out there depending on what your particular use case is.
Great points. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. There is a question that says, does AI and technology generally distance doctors from patients? At its core, isn't healthcare about emotional connectivity with the patient? How do you walk the fine line? Ruth? I saw a note here, sorry. So this is, I think, a question for you as a physician, but I will say that, like I was saying before, AI does not necessarily need to interact with the patient, although it could, and may be useful in places where there are not physicians in rural locations and things like that. But AI also can enhance various other aspects of healthcare. Maybe that physician's going to spend hours reading histories and trying to determine what a diagnosis is. If AI can read a lot of text and help at least give some options and help that physician save time and get to the patient sooner, I think that could be super helpful. What's your thought, Ashu?
It's a double-edged sword, right? As with every technology. Like if I could be in clinic, not facing the computer, there's an ambient AI that's just listening to my conversation with the patient, structures it for me and has the note ready when I'm on the way out the door and makes sure that I'm billing. Such solutions exist and they would be great, right? That would help me, as you said, get home to my own kids and family sooner, but be able to pay attention to the patient with maximal attention, not worried about billing, not worried about note taking, any of that stuff, because there's an algorithm back there doing that stuff for us. On the other hand, right, there are ways, like the electronic health record was supposed to be a way to really improve patient note taking, and there are numerous advantages of it, but it's the number one, like in physician surveys, it's like the number one cause of burnout is having to deal with the EHR. I think there are ways that the technology can help and to hurt. As a technophile myself, I think it's likely to help more than it'll hurt, but it's up to us to define the way that happens, that the regulation and data privacy. The reason that ambient AI isn't established everywhere already, even though companies exist for it and people would love it, is because of data privacy issues, right? Is the transition of the data from the clinic room to the cloud where it's being processed secure enough that it's not going to get hacked and the hospital's not going to get $100 million HIPAA fine? So, like there are real solutions, there are real challenges to that, but I think those are solvable problems, but they're not going to be perfectly solvable, right? There's no 100% secure data. The problem is there's no 100% secure data now either, right? So like to say, oh, we shouldn't do this because it's not perfect is ignoring the fact that there's lots of imperfections in our current solutions too. So
you're right. Yeah, nothing is perfect. And I don't think we're saying AI is going to solve everything. And I really would like for us to think about innovation as what really new thing can we do? Of course, we'll have that incremental help in certain ways, but hopefully we can think like boldly of like something that we've not conceived now and how AI can be impactful in our lives, but not turn us into batteries in the matrix. So not to that point.
And it looked like Dr. Obe mentioned, what are some of the complexities we're seeing involved with pediatric innovation with regards to data privacy, data ownership, especially as children usually use a proxy. And that's a big problem even for the wearables work that we're doing. We have to consent the parents, that's a legal requirement. But if you have an adult, and for a baby, the baby doesn't know any better. Whether that's right or not is a different thing, but the baby doesn't know any better today. But if you have a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old, we assent them, right? Like in terms of respecting the person with their own autonomy, like our consent forms require the person of the legal assent age, which is usually like 13 and up, to sign and say, yeah, I agree with that. Now, again, everything's a double. Are their parents like secretly prodding them in the back, go sign it, right? I do the best to avoid that. But that is a complication, right? That's a complication for pregnant women, studies on pregnant women. It's a complication but it's also a complication for like social media, right? Like I take pictures of my kids and I put them on Facebook. Maybe in 10 years, they're going to be like, Papa, why'd you put this picture of me up? I didn't tell you to do that, right? I think and now everything's searchable, right? So
Right.
like nothing, once you put it on the internet, nothing ever disappears. So that is a challenge. I don't know if there's a one size fits all solution to that question. You just have to decide as a researcher or as a clinician, whether the risks and whether the benefits of this potential research outweigh the potential risks. And there's ethics committees and there's research about the ethics of all that stuff. I'm no expert in any of those things, but I do know that there are clinical problems where implementation of innovative technologies would help, and I bet would help more than the potential risk of data loss.
I agree. And we just have to be diligent in our creation of these technologies and monitoring the use of them so that we are compliant and protecting privacy and also respecting the children as they get older and are able to consent. Lots of wonderful questions here. I will try to answer those offline that is possible. It looks like we're about out of time. So this has been such a amazing session. Ashu, I really appreciate you staying to the end, and to our attendees, thank you so much for joining. We've loved having you involved in this discussion of innovation in healthcare. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.